Welcome back, everyone, to Mind Has Mountains, a channel exploring religion, philosophy, and the esoteric. It's been a while. Apologies for the delay. The past 10 months or so, I've been busy traveling abroad. I've been in India, writing and recently completing a spiritual travelogue describing my experiences in India. If you are drawn to the content of this channel, I would encourage you to check out my writing. I've included a link in the description to my Substack, where I've been posting weekly extracts from the book. So I would invite you to check that out. It is free to subscribe. But now to today's video. A question to start us off. Why do humans communicate not just through words and letters, but through images? Take a moment to consider just how surrounded we are, particularly in the modern world, with images, whether that's photos, pictures, paintings, adverts, symbols, music videos, film, graffiti, to name just a few. We live in a highly visual world. Why use imagery at all? Why not just rely on verbal communication? Well, I suspect the advertising and marketing industry has known this for a long time, that whilst words and letters are no doubt useful in day-to-day communication, they have their limitations. There is something about the very nature of imagery as a medium that means it can speak more directly to deeper layers of the human psyche or mind, that can speak more directly to the human unconscious. This is going to be the concern of today's video because we see this no less in religion. Today, we are going to be diving straight into the deep end. We are stepping out of the clean familiarity of everyday orthodox religion and entering a radically different symbolic landscape. If mainstream Vedic orthodoxy emphasizes ritual purity, social order, and the systematic avoidance of so-called pollution, Tantra confronts the practitioner with the exact opposite: corpses, cremation grounds, severed heads, explicit sexuality, and deliberate social transgression. To the uninitiated or the orthodox mind, this imagery is profoundly shocking, problematic, even repulsive. People fear, of course, what they don't understand, and one can imagine the faces of shock and horror on the part of the first Christian missionaries to arrive in India and come across such imagery and symbolism for the first time. But in the esoteric or twilight language of Tantra, these are not tools of mere shock value. They are deliberate, and I would argue sophisticated technologies of liberation. Today's video assumes that you have some familiarity with Tantra. If not, I would refer you to my two existing introductory videos. There are links in the description. Moreover, we're going to be focusing on the Hindu Tantric tradition as opposed to the Buddhist Tantric school, also known as Vajrayana, simply because most of my recent reading and research has been in the Hindu side of Tantra. But if you would like or would be interested in a video on Buddhist Tantra, also known as the Vajrayana, just drop a comment below and I'll see if I can get to it in the near future. Our roadmap for today's presentation draws heavily from the insights of the late Dr. David Kinsley, particularly the brilliant concluding reflections in his seminal work, the Ten Mahavidyas, Tantric Visions of the Divine Feminine. The Mahavidyas, of course, being the 10 principal goddesses comprising the Hindu Tantric pantheon. While Kinsley focuses on these feminine deities, we are going to use his framework to examine the broader esoteric meaning of tantric imagery. When I say esoteric, I'm referring to the deeper symbolic and metaphorical meaning underlying, in this case, religion. By the end of this video, you will understand not just what these symbols are, but why they matter and how they function as instruments of radical psychological and spiritual awakening. Let's begin with the physical space that defines so much of tantric sadhana or practice, namely the cremation ground. In Orthodox Hinduism, the cremation ground is the ultimate site of pollution. It is a place of grief, decay, and impurity, somewhere you should leave as quickly as possible and wash yourself after visiting. Yet, in Tantric literature, we constantly read that the worship of these fierce energies is most potent, and sometimes only effective, when performed right in the middle of a cremation ground. Why? Kinsley offers a few layers of interpretation for us to unpack. First, the cremation ground represents the ultimate forbidden thing. For the heroic practitioner, entering this space is a direct confrontation with the absolute worst fears of the human ego. By entering the space of maximum pollution and terror, the practitioner forces an internal realization that nothing is inherently impure. Underneath the apparently horrific exterior, in the Tantric view, all of reality is thoroughly suffused with Shakti, the primordial cosmic energy. If God is truly everywhere, then she must be in the rotting flesh and the ash as much as in the pristine temple. Second, think about the cremation ground as the ultimate site of transformation. Initiations across global religious traditions almost always mimic a process of death and rebirth. You die to your old, mundane self and are reborn into a higher spiritual reality. We see this in the Western world, for example, in the degree of entered apprentice, when an applicant is initiated into the mysteries and privileges, as they say, of ancient Freemasonry. Now, in the Tantric context, what better venue for this transformation than the literal place where human beings undergo the most radical transformation available to our species, the shift from life to death? But Kinsley correctly notes a nuance here that regular texts often gloss over. Not all people doing sadhana in cremation grounds are world-renouncing ascetics. They're not trying to escape to a higher spiritual reality. Many are ordinary householders. They're not looking to dissolve into the absolute or escape worldly illusions. Instead, they're seeking concrete power, worldly success, and well-being. Tantric ritual is explicitly designed to thin the veil between the material world and the invisible spirit world. The tantric practitioner wants to contact, appease, or even command non-physical entities to gain specific blessings or extraordinary faculties. And where is the barrier between the physical and the non-physical at its most porous? The cremation ground. Death itself is the literal transition from a physical state of being to a non-physical one. By occupying that liminal geographical space, the practitioner positions themselves at the crossroads of realities to pull power directly from the unseen world. If you look at the iconography of tantric deities, they are almost universally adorned with garlands of human skulls or freshly severed heads dripping with blood. You see this famously here with the Hindu goddess Kali, often considered the first of the 10 Mahavidyas. In conventional or everyday religious art and sensibility, this looks like the depiction of a monster. But in Tantra, these severed heads are actually trophies of spiritual victory. Kinsley suggests that the severed head or skull represents a radically transformed and liberated consciousness. Think for a moment about the human condition. Our consciousness is deeply bound to and limited by our physical bodies. We experience the world through the narrow prism of our sensory organs and egoic conditioning. The act of chopping off the head signifies the absolute separation of the mind from the limitations of the physical form. It represents a consciousness that has been cut free from bodily constraints, allowing it to expand and travel without restriction. The skulls worn by the deities are actually symbols of the practitioners themselves. Practitioners who, through intense effort or divine grace, have successfully achieved the state of bodily transcendence. This isn't unique to India. It echoes a universal archetype found in mysticism and shamanism globally. To gain unmediated access to the spirit world, the shaman or mystic must frequently undergo a profound internal crisis that manifests symbolically as death and dismemberment. You must be broken down entirely before you can be reconstructed as a vehicle for the divine. If you look closely at the severed heads dangling from the waist or necks of these fierce goddesses, Kali to use this example, they don't look like they died in agony. In fact, they almost always wear expressions of profound peace, serenity, even quiet satisfaction. They are at peace because the ego has finally been decapitated, leaving behind nothing but pure, unconditioned awareness. And in Hindu Tantra, you are believed to be ultimately not separate from, but in some sense one with, this pure, unconditioned reality, referred to as Shiva. Now let's pivot to perhaps the most misunderstood element of Tantra, its dense, explicit sexual symbolism. Mainstream Orthodox religion, both in India and the West, frequently treats sexuality with suspicion, viewing it as a distraction from the spirit, something to be strictly regulated, sublimated, or even repressed. Tantra takes the exact opposite approach. On the most abstract philosophical level, Tantra views the entire universe not as a static creation, but as a perpetual dynamic dance between two foundational principles: Shiva, representing pure, unmoving consciousness, and Shakti, representing the dynamic, creative, immanent energy that brings the universe into form. Reality itself is an ongoing act of cosmic intercourse between consciousness and energy. In the Tantric view, Shiva and Shakti, the masculine and feminine principles respectively, are not truly separate, but two sides of one and the same coin. We see this beautifully coded into Tantric geometry, specifically through diagrams known as yantras, which are purely geometric, and mandalas. The primary building blocks of these sacred diagrams are interlocking triangles, as you see in the image. A downward-pointing triangle is an ancient cross-cultural symbol for the vulva, or the feminine generative source. An upward-pointing triangle represents the phallus, or masculine intent. When these triangles overlap and superimpose upon one another, the geometry itself is a literal visual depiction of sexual union, signifying the harmonious blending of cosmic polarities. But Tantra doesn't keep sex purely abstract or metaphorical. When it enters the realm of actual ritual practice, the underlying philosophy is radical. The awakening of the Kundalini, the latent spiritual energy believed to lie coiled and dormant at the base of the spine. This is achieved not by smothering or denying sexual energy, but by fully understanding and rightly channeling it. It is about recognizing that the ecstatic drive of sexual energy is simply a localized expression of cosmic Shakti. By approaching it with conscious awareness and discernment, rather than through unconscious desire and lust, the physical act becomes a launch pad for the expansion of consciousness. Perhaps the most jarring aspect of tantric imagery is the deliberate, simultaneous juxtaposition of sex and death. You will frequently see a goddess standing in a copulatory embrace atop a lifeless corpse, or rituals that require sexual union to take place inside a cremation ground. The central deity in this particularly striking image is, of course, Chinnamasta, one of the 10 Mahavidyas. She is instantly recognizable by her self-decapitation. Below her, beneath her feet, the god of love and desire, Kama, and his consort, Rati, are engaged in sexual union on a lotus blossom. What on earth is going on in such imagery? Well, Kinsley provides two profound answers to this question. First, it comes down to the core methodology of Tantra, which demands direct, raw, unmediated experience. Tantric practice is, for obvious reasons, not a public congregational affair. It doesn't rely on institutionalized priesthoods or communal services. It is instead an intensely private journey undertaken by a solitary adept in the margins of society. The tantric practitioner is searching for an explosive intensity of feeling, a visceral religious experience that shatters mundane perception. Now, think about the human experience. What are the two most overwhelming, destabilizing events in human existence? Dying and sexual ecstasy. Both of these experiences completely strip away our social masks. They rip us out of our conventional comfort zones and tear down our psychological insulation. By intentionally marrying the imagery of sex and death, Tantra leverages the raw, explosive psychological power of these forces to induce a total transformation of the self. Second, this conjunction in the tantric view is an honest, unblinking mirror of the cosmos itself. Reality is not a sanitized linear progression of goodness. It is a simultaneous, non-stop loop of creation and destruction, birth and death. Every single second, billions of organisms are conceived and billions of organisms rot. The universe feeds on itself to sustain itself. By presenting sex and death in the very same breath, Tantra forces the practitioner to accept the totality of nature. If this imagery shocks or upsets us, Kinsley points out that it is only because we live in a state of deep, sanitized denial. We go to extraordinary lengths to hide, mask, and insulate ourselves from the destructive, decaying dimension of reality. Tantra tears that mask off and asks, can you find the divine in the whole circle, or only in the parts that comfort you? This brings us to our final theme, the attainment of liberation through marginality and transgression. Mainstream religion is deeply invested in maintaining the social hierarchy, purity laws, and conventional moral frameworks. It tells you how to be a good citizen, a good parent, a good worker, a clean and proper member of society. Tantra, however, particularly the left-handed path, of which I've previously made a video, intentionally seeks out the forbidden. It actively incorporates so-called taboo substances and transgressive behaviors. According to Kinsley, identifying with these fierce marginal deities is a calculated psychological strategy. By stepping outside of approved social norms, expectations, and roles, the tantric practitioner experiences a radical sense of liberation. Human beings are deeply imprisoned by their social conditioning. We are trapped by our notions of status, reputation, and what is deemed proper or acceptable. This conditioning creates a rigid, fragile ego. The logic of Tantra is to deliberately stretch your consciousness past these conventional boundaries. When you willingly engage with what society labels as low, polluted, or terrifying, the fragile walls of the ego collapse. You realize that your true identity is not your social role, or in the Indian context, your caste. Your true identity is the boundless, unconditioned awareness underlying the whole show. Transgression becomes the ultimate shortcut to psychological freedom. To conclude, the esoteric imagery and symbolism of Tantra is not an ancient curiosity or a collection of primitive shock tactics. It is a highly sophisticated, psychologically brave spiritual path that refuses to sweep the apparently dark, uncomfortable, or messy aspects of existence under the rug. It provides a blueprint for finding freedom not by escaping the world, but by diving directly into its most intense currents. Tantra reminds us that true enlightenment cannot be fragile. If your so-called peace of mind depends on the world being perfectly clean, quiet, and predictable, then it isn't true peace. The Tantric sages challenge us to find the divine in the middle of the cremation ground, to recognize consciousness even when it's severed from the body, and to see the sacred spark in the very things society tells us to shun and fear. Thank you for tuning in. If you found this deep dive valuable, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. How does this tantric view of reality change the way you think about life and death? As always, I'll see you in the next video.